All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Kim Dorman, and I serve as the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Princeton Public Library. I'm delighted that you are all here this evening. I love it when so many people come who know the panelists. It makes it extra special. Before we get started, it's important to mention that this room is T-coil enabled. So if you have a T-coil enabled device, please feel welcome to switch it on at this time. If you don't have a T-coil enabled device, but you'd like to try out the system, we have some headsets at the back of the room that you're welcome to try. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's program, where author Daniel Pollack-Pelzner talks about his book, Lin-Manuel Miranda, The Education of an Artist, with Brian Herrera. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors for this event, the Lewis Center for the Arts, for their collaboration, and also Labyrinth Books for their support. I know you will want to buy a copy of this book, which is available from them for $30. Daniel Pollack-Pelzner has written about theater and contemporary culture for The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and The New York Times. Born and raised in Oregon, he teaches theater history at Portland State University and is the scholar in residence at the Portland Shakespeare Project. He lives in Portland with his wife, whom he met in 5th grade production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and their 2 children. Brian Eugenio Herrera is by turns a writer, teacher, and scholar, presently based in New Jersey but forever rooted in New Mexico. Brian's work, whether academic or artistic, examines the history of gender, sexuality, and race within and through the U.S. popular performance. He is Associate Professor of Theater in the Lewis Center for the Arts at Princeton University, where he is also a core faculty member in the program in Gender and Sexuality Studies and a faculty affiliate with the programs in American Studies, Music Theater, and Latino Studies. As I said, they are both here to talk about Daniel's book, Lin-Manuel Miranda, The Education of an Artist. And this book has gotten some particularly swoon-worthy endorsements, some of the most swoon-worthy endorsements I've ever seen. There were so many good ones, it was hard to choose which ones to share with you all. And I hope it says something that Andrew Lloyd Webber's quote didn't make the cut for this intro. Renee Elise Goldsberry, Tony and Grammer winning actor, said, "It's a revelatory tell-all, but there is so much gold here, I had to put down the popcorn and start taking notes. At one point, I was crying reading the part I thought I knew because there was so much more to learn. The life lessons here demystify more than how to make a masterpiece. They teach us how to live. May the origin story of our heroes be, all of our heroes be told in this way." Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Chiara Alegria-Hudes says, "A valuable, comprehensive look at an artist who keeps coming of age, growing with every project. Pollack-Pelzner pulls back the curtain on one of the great, exuberant creative minds of our time. Lin-Manuel's work has expanded our national spirit. His collaborative and creative processes, revealed in captivating close-up here, will blow you away." And finally, John M. Chu, director of Crazy Rich Asians and Wicked. "Everyone knows Lin-Manuel Miranda, the icon. This book introduces you to Lin the kid, the collaborator, the relentless tinkerer who never stopped learning. It's a reminder that great art doesn't come fully formed. It's messy, it's joyful, it's made in basements and buses and borrowed pianos. If you've ever been inspired by his work, you owe it to yourself to read the story behind it. This is the mixtape of how it all began." And with that, please welcome.
Wow, thank you so much. What a treat to see you here. What an honor to be here with Brian and to get to explore the life of Lin-Manuel Miranda with all of you. I'm just curious, sort of, if have any of you seen a Lin-Manuel Miranda production? Oh my God, okay, so can you complete the lyric? I am not throwing away my... Okay, I want to be in... Oh, very good. Okay, this is gonna be the tricky one. Sir, I heard your name at... Princeton, bravo. Well done. I am delighted to be here on the fictional site where Hamilton encountered Aaron Burr. I'll tell you a little bit about how I came to write this book, and then Brian and I are going to have a conversation. Maybe I'll read a page of it, and then I'm excited to know what you're curious about, and if any of you want to stick around and talk about the book afterward, I would love to. It is a true honor to be discussing this book at Princeton, where we have some of the world's great musical theater teachers and scholars. To be sitting next to Brian Herrera, to have Stacey Wolf in the audience is a thrill. And the great dramaturgs of the American theater, Julie Felice Dubiner, who's taught me most of what I know about contemporary American drama, is here. And I love being in conversation with you and with longtime friends as well. I'm a Shakespeare scholar by training. I did meet my wife when she was playing Oberon, the King of the Fairies, in 5th grade. I was thoroughly enchanted. She ignored me for several years, but then we got together later on. And in Oregon, where I grew up and where I now live, I would go to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, where Julie had this amazing commissioning project to create a new canon of American plays on the model of Shakespeare's canon. And that made me really curious of who our Shakespeares are today, who are writing the big-scale national dramas in an innovative dramatic form that could give us a new sense of who we are as a community. And the director of the Public Theater told me, this is about 10 years ago, I had to check out this new hip-hop take on the American Revolution by a guy whom Oscar Eustis was comparing to a modern-day Shakespeare. So this was July 2015. My grandma, who lives in New York, was celebrating her 90th birthday. Bubba Yivi had taken me to see In the Heights when it opened on Broadway, because Bubba Yivi grew up in Washington Heights in an apartment above her immigrant father's kosher deli. And when she saw the Hebrew lettering on the set underneath the Rosario car service, she was cavelling. And so I thought, okay, we'll go visit Bubba Yivi. We had one night of grandparent babysitting with our little kids, and my wife said she would either take me out to a very nice dinner in New York, or she would take me to see this new show that had just opened on Broadway. And I said, fancy dinner, please. That sounds amazing. But Grandma said, no, Daniel, you have to see this show. This is going to be the next thing. So it was in previews, late July. We go to see Hamilton. Down the row from us is then Vice President Joe Biden. And watching the sequence of American presidents and vice presidents on stage with the current vice president sitting next to me felt like, as a Shakespeare geek, about as close as I could come to watching Henry V next to Queen Elizabeth. And I thought, well, I missed out on the first 400 years of Shakespeare reception history, but I can be in the room where it happens when Hamilton goes around the world. And so I tracked it to London to see what would happen when the American Revolution goes to Buckingham Palace, and I went to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria when Lin-Manuel brought the show there, and ended up interviewing Lin-Manuel a couple of times. And what really struck me about talking to him is that he is so quick to credit the teachers and mentors who have shaped him as an artist, to the point that many of his fans know the name of his elementary school music teacher, Barbara Ames, who cast him as Conrad Birdie in the 6th grade play, clad him in a gold lame jacket, and then told all the girls in the class to swoon whenever he opened his mouth. And at the end of that production, Ms. Ames told me, he came up to her afterward and said, "This is what I want to do for the rest of my life." And Lin-Manuel would also talk about the projects that he wanted to take on based on who he wanted to learn from. And I thought that what a wonderful way of thinking about a career as an artist. I had just gone through a career transition myself. I was missing my own students, and I wanted to really write a book for students, for people who want to have lives in the arts or want to have a creative life and don't know what the road might be. It's not like, we going to med school or going to law school. And I thought Lin-Manuel is not a blueprint, but he has a mindset of how to learn from everybody around him that I wanted to explore and that I thought could perhaps be inspiring for people who wanted to have a life in the arts too. And so I sent Lin-Manuel an email, 2021, I guess, with the totally unabashedly cringy subject line, "Who tells your story?" And I outlined this book that I wanted to write about his teachers, and he said, okay, let's meet. And Stephen Sondheim had just passed away, and so I think he was thinking a lot about mentorship and what the legacies were of the people who had helped him expand his toolkit as an artist. And we came up with a list of everybody that he considered a teacher. And some were formal teachers. Dr. Rembert Herbert, the 8th grade English teacher who wrote on the back of one of his essays, "Lin, you're hibernating in this class, but it's spring, come out and join us." And then introduced him to the student-written theater club so he could start to write his own shows, to Andrew Lloyd Webber and Stephen Schwartz, and the elementary school bus driver, Dwayne Baker, who was an aspiring hip-hop artist and would test out his material on the 10-year-old sitting behind the driver's seat in the bus on the 40-minute drive down the West Side Highway from Inwood to the Upper East Side. And I love that once Lin-Manuel's mother started showing me his report cards from elementary school, you could trace beginning of the year. Mrs. Gottling says 4th grade, Lin-Manuel's a little bit shy. After he's gotten the Dwayne Baker rap tutorial on the bus, by the end of the year, Ms. Gottling says, Lin-Manuel has started to come out of his shell and wrote a Jack and the Beanstalk rap for the rest of the class. And I loved getting to learn about these formative figures and to maybe try to dispel a little bit the kind of myth that I think persists that our artist heroes are kind of lone geniuses in a room just with masterpieces springing fully formed out of their head. And I really loved the design that Simon & Schuster came up for this book. I said, I don't just want the subject photo. I want my request for them was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I want everybody who influenced Lin present in his self. And they came up with a much more elegant design, I think, to convey that sense of input and output. And if anybody can name all 6 figures on the cover here, there'll be a special prize. Brian will figure out what that special prize is. It's been a thrill getting to talk to all these people and then to try to put it into what I hoped would be a story, really. I used to teach a class on coming-of-age stories for first-year students, and we'd read a number, and then students would write their own coming-of-age story at the end, and I always wanted to try writing one. So this is my version of a 90s YA coming-of-age story, and I was very thrilled that my hosts in New York have a 10-year-old son who told me he has now read the book 4 times. So he's a precocious reader. He's maybe skipped over the F words, but I hope this is a book that could be accessible to anybody who's curious to learn about it. Maybe I'll read one page from it, and then I'm excited, Brian, to be in conversation with you. So this is actually the first scene I wrote for the book, although I rewrote it, I think, 5 times until it got to be this version here. That's something I learned from Lin-Manuel. And it's a scene where he's learning how to be a leader in his high school theater club, musical rep, in 1998 at Hunter College High School, and he's directing the show, he says, the first show that allowed him to be Puerto Rican at school, West Side Story. Student leaders were essentially ordering around their friends, and for some, it could be difficult to maintain authority. Lin-Manuel did it with enthusiasm. He started every rehearsal with improv games, nonsense rhymes, and rhythm patterns he'd picked up at after-school sessions with the Creative Arts Team youth program. When the cast had to learn tricky steps for the dance at the gym, he declared it National Mambo Week and brought in food and mambo-themed warm-up activities to keep everybody excited. With hips that seemed to dance on their own, he nicknamed himself Butt Brain. He roped the directing team into filming a parody video at his house to screen at the cast party. He called it Schmest Side Schmorry. His natural exuberance became a motivational strategy. There were diehards like me, he says. I know I'm going to be doing it as long as possible, and there were folks for whom musical reps and extracurriculars. How do I make it fun? When you're truly doing something for the love of it, and you can't hire or fire anyone, it's really about a shared vision. It's about how we can make something bigger together than we can on our own. The biggest inspiration came one day at lunchtime in room 210. The cast and crew of West Side Story crammed into the windowless classroom. A few students dashed up from a jazz chorus performance in the auditorium, and when they arrived in the doorway, they froze. There, sitting in a chair, wearing a brown sweater, his gray beard trimmed and his hooded eyes aglint, was Stephen Sondheim. As it happened, Sondheim's writing partner on Pacific Overtures and Assassins, the playwright John Weidman, had a daughter at Hunter who was 2 grades below Lin-Manuel. She'd come home and told her dad that the senior who was directing West Side Story wanted to invite Sondheim to speak to the drama club. Steve loved kids, John Weidman says. He had a real interest in teaching. I thought it might be something he'd enjoy. He called Sondheim, said that if Weidman would accompany him, he'd do it. So on the appointed day, Weidman met Sondheim at Hunter, and they walked into the packed classroom. As the director, Lin-Manuel was expected to ask the first question. Everyone looked to him. All I could come up with, he says, was, "What was it like?" Sondheim looked confused. What was it like? Yeah, what was it like making West Side Story? Oh, I see, Sondheim replied. And for the rest of the lunch period, he told them. But rather than present the origin story of his triumphs, he gave the students a glimpse of his missteps. He shared lyrics that had been jettisoned, songs that were reordered, verses he wished he'd improved. He revealed that he'd written lyrics for the show's famous dance prologue, but the choreographer, Jerome Robbins, decided he could convey the rivalry better through movement, so the words were cut. Sondheim explained that Riff, the leader of the Jets, got his name because he carried around a trumpet, or he did until the book writer, Arthur Lawrence, asked him, "When was the last time you saw a gang member carrying a frickin' bugle?" No more trumpet. Masterpieces, the students learned, didn't emerge fully formed from a single creator's head. They were the product of collaboration, negotiation, and constant revision. Sondheim had taken the students inside the artistic process. What he taught me, Lin-Manuel said, was that the process is messy. It didn't have to be perfect. That's the first thing that pulled back the curtain on how to make a show. When the lunch period ended, Sondheim stood by the door, shaking each student's hand as they left. The musical rep crew felt validated. Sondheim had told them that he preferred the Broadway order of the Jet songs, first Cool, then G. Officer Krupke, rather than the films, and that was the choice that Lin-Manuel had made for their production. Somehow, the deity had blessed their show. After the opening night performance, after the applause and cheers and curtain call, Una LaMarche, who played one of the Shark Girls, spotted Lin-Manuel weeping in his mother's arms. The show was over. She went up to hug him, and his shoulders were heaving, Una says. Seeing a teenage boy in a public place crying out of joy and happiness just stayed with me, showed how much it meant to him. And to this day, Lin-Manuel says that his goal as a writer and composer is to recreate his musical rep experience. I was a kid who figured out who I was in the context of the drama clubs at my school, he says. I think a part of my brain is always just trying to make the best school play. So that's a little bit from the book. And Brian,
thank you, Daniel.
Glad to be here with you.
And I would just want to do a pre-sale endorsement of all of the blurbs that we heard, but also the spirit of the book that really comes through is this idea of this is a book that is very much about witnessing the practice of making art with all of its risks and all of its joys. But also, I think what's so striking is how it maps the question of what is often called being a lifelong learner. And often this kind of thing of when you're like the expectation of mastery and the expectation of getting really good, but in order to keep being better, you have to keep learning. And that is the story that gets told over and over again in the book in ways that are constantly surprising and constantly moving and unexpected. However much you know about the story of Lin-Manuel Miranda, and I actually do know a lot about the story of Lin. It was a way to see it that I think is, I thought, very interesting, especially in terms of the biographical genre. Because I'm struck, for all of your scholarly and other achievements, I was surprised to realize that this is your first book. And the second I saw that this was your first full book, I was reminded of so many admonitions I've heard over the years from professional writers, from PhD advisors, from others. Whenever somebody says, I'd like to write a biographical project, everybody says, no. Or like, would you recommend writing I wouldn't. You know, this idea of biography as a genre that is of forbidding difficulty or complexity, requiring a capacity and a skill set, and also a uniquely qualified subject who has lived long enough and to have typically lived long enough to have died, but then also to have left materials and papers and all kinds of conventional sources behind them to build a story that is both authoritative and intimate. So you broke all the rules in A, doing it as your first book project, B, picking a subject who is 45 years old. So arguably somebody who might be at the midpoint or even below in his life, and certainly in terms of given his capacity to keep making, you might have to write part two, but also somebody who hasn't left behind papers. So I know this had a lot to do with interviews, but it also had to do a lot with creative approaches. You mentioned the report cards. You mentioned, we've talked about like sort of trolling through, like digging into deep social media stuff. Can you, like the hubris of writing a biography, why try? What made that feel right? There'd be all kinds of ways where you could write about Lin in other registers, but this is understood itself as a biography, even as it broke a lot of those rules. So,
boy, if I'd known how hard it was from your description, I probably wouldn't have done it. I do remember, and I was sharing this with you, Brian, that my the chair of the history department, I was a history major in college, said you could do whatever you want for your senior thesis project except write a biography, because you haven't lived long enough yet. But as you say, Lin is 45. I'm 45 in 6 months. So I figured however long Lin has lived, I have lived at least 6 months longer than that. And I actually, I'll admit, I didn't conceive of this book initially as a biography. I thought of it as a Bildungsroman, which I suppose sounds pretentious to say, but I wanted it to be the story of a young person's development. And the title all along was The Miseducation of Lin-Manuel Miranda. And then I realized he didn't really have a miseducation. He's been well socialized. But it was going to be Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I even modeled the first sentence of this book on the first sentence of Joyce's Portrait of the Artist. He starts with, once upon a time there was a moo cow, right? It's like from the point of view of a kid. And that was my narrative challenge for myself. It's like, could I have the narrative point of view start from a child's perspective, and then grow the narrative voice grow up as the character grows up, so that by the epilogue, everything I know how to do and everything Lin-Manuel knows how to do is in one of the sentences. And then I remember Lin texted me a letter that Oscar Hammerstein wrote to his biographer, to Hammerstein's biographer. And I think I said, like, why did you send this to me? And he said, well, you're my biographer, so. And I thought, oh, okay, I guess, so we're doing this. And it was, of course, never going to be womb to tomb, because thankfully there is no tomb. I thought of it as womb to tick, tick, boom as a kind of a framing thing. When I started it, basically all of Lin-Manuel's work was at that point accessible on screen. So In the Heights had come out as a movie. Hamilton was available on Disney+. Moana and Encanto and Vivo were all streaming as well. So I thought this is a moment when most of the things that he's created are accessible to people. And I hope that I could dive into them and illuminate the choices that went into it. I remember describing this project at a family Thanksgiving dinner, and my uncle turning to the assembled group, not to me, and saying, would we consider Daniel a person with psychological insight? And I think my daughter said, and my son said, no, and my wife said, what? But I thought, okay, you're naming something that I'm gonna have to have. And I didn't realize, I thought this was just gonna be a craft book, and Lin-Manuel and I were gonna talk about our favorite rhymes in Sondheim and how to structure a dramatic soliloquy. And what I didn't realize as an academic dead from the neck down is that artists actually draw on their lives and their emotional trajectories and their heartbreaks and their passions and their fantasies in order to create their work. So this ended up being a book that dove much more into Lin-Manuel's emotional life and personal life than I thought it was going to. And the blessing for me was that I happened, because we're about the same age, I had gone to college with a number of people who had gone to high school and college, or well, not with college, but had gone to high school, elementary school with Lin-Manuel. So I happened to have been in a production of As You Like It my freshman year in college with Lin-Manuel's high school girlfriend, whom I didn't know was Lin-Manuel's high school girlfriend at the time, because I didn't know who Lin-Manuel Miranda was. I just knew that I was Lord Number 3 and she was a really good actor who was playing Celia in the production. So when I reconnected with Meredith, she had the class project that Lin-Manuel had written in 11th grade about Alexander Hamilton's duel with Aaron Burr. That was a film script he wrote as a creative project for his American history class, and had enlisted her, who was his artistic partner as well, to help him film. And like getting to see like the genesis of his interest in the story. Hamilton says, you know, best of wives, best of women to Eliza in this script. And in this version of the story, Hamilton is so bereft and distraught at the death of his own son in a duel that he resolves he's going to throw away his shot. He's not going to risk taking another life when he fights. Lin-Manuel turned in the project. He told me his teacher gave him a B-. He said that's an overly simplistic psychological explanation for a complex historical moment. And so then 20 years later, he was writing a musical, and Oscar Eustis, the director of the Public Theater, kept saying to him, why does Hamilton throw away his shot at the end of the story? He spent this whole musical saying, I am not going to throw away my shot, and he does it at the end. You have to explain this choice to us. And Lin-Manuel said all he could have in his head was B-, B-. Last time he tried to explain this, and he didn't want to offer a simple explanation, and then he resolved instead to do this kind of CAT scan of Hamilton's brain as the bullet is speeding toward him. But I loved getting these glimpses, and Meredith also had the first script of In the Heights that Lin-Manuel wrote when he was a sophomore in college, and dedicated it to her, his high school girlfriend. Meredith, my salty tears and love for you are on every page. You are mine and I am yours forever, which is a risky thing to write on the page of your high school girlfriend's copy of a script. I won't spoil what happened to them at the end of that year, but he also wrote a musical about that later on. But this was what was really helpful for me in thinking about writing a first book, Brian. I never thought I could write a book, let alone write a biography. I mean, a book just seemed like Mount Everest to me, and I would stare at the blank page and be intimidated. But getting to see Lin-Manuel's first draft of In the Heights, and what you see when you read through is like, it's really fun, and there's not a single word from that first draft that ended up in the version that opened on Broadway 8 years later, except for the title In Washington Heights. That's the only line that stayed. Every single line of dialogue, every single song, every single musical phrase was rewritten. And that freed me up from the sense that I had to have my first draft be as perfect as what was in my head. I thought, well, what have I learned from the person that I'm writing about? You just put, you put everything that you know that's true on the page, and then you do what Lin-Manuel did, which is you trust that your collaborators are going to help you make it better and tell you where what's in your head doesn't match what's on the page. So for me, the subject matter actually enabled me rather than inhibiting me, and thank God for the editors who spared you reading the 600-page version of this book and down to a readable form.
Well, one of the things that is so real to me in a way that I had no expectation going in was how real this book deals with exactly what you're talking about, the give and take of collaboration. You know, how much it's about the humility of collaboration, but also the arrogance that these people will help me do my thing, like this balance of having something but knowing you need help, but also having the clarity and confidence of like sort of, I know what feels right to me, and that how what we see in the book, in how he came to himself through collaboration. We see that in his early kid stuff, you know, even with like the different parenting styles of his parents, because what Daniel didn't say is like, we don't actually start with Lin, we start with his parents. We start with the fact of his coming of being was more a creating of a space into which he could arrive. And then that is the, in some ways, the rest of the story is he keeps arriving into these places and finding new ways to become more of himself. But that also is a really interesting way to think about collaboration, because we often think about collaboration as arguments. We often think about collaboration as who wins or who gets their name on it, who gets their name laughed off of it. But as you're talking, I'm also wondering, what did you experience as a collaborator with Lin on this project? Because this is not an unauthorized biography. This was conceived in collaboration with him. It was, there was return, like you mentioned as we walked over, there was a moment when the draft was reviewed by his attorney wife who's an exacting and like her presence in this book is remarkable. But it sounds to me that you also collaborated with Lin on this project. What did you learn about him or yourself as a collaborator in the work you did together, bringing this book to reality?
Oh, it's a lovely way of phrasing that question. So this is true. I mean, Lin didn't wish this upon himself, but he cooperated in the process of it. And when we went over who I would talk to, and then he says his favorite part was I would then reach out to other people, and they would often text him and be like, "Who is Pollack-Pelzner, and is he legit?" And they go back and say he's legit. So, sometimes these people were hard to track down. I really wanted to talk to. And this was one person I really wanted to talk to, Rebecca Podolsky, the assistant director for West Side Story at Hunter College High School in 1998. Lin wasn't still in touch with her. I was like, I Google stalk her. I think this is the same Rebecca Podolsky who is now an OB-GYN in Midtown Manhattan. I'm not sure. I call her office. The receptionist answers, Dr. Podolsky's office, what are you calling in reference to? I said, I'm calling about Lin-Manuel Miranda. And there's this pause, and she says, I don't think that's covered by our insurance. I guess I have caught a case of Lin-Manuel Miranda. Might be a pre-existing condition. So I would learn all this material from these people, and then I would go back to him and say, okay, they said this. What do you say about this this moment? And sometimes there were different stories, and sometimes they were actually sort of sweet moments of reconciliation of perspective. So. I was always interested in the stories when he didn't get along with other people, because they're actually quite rare. But I think he would say, and everybody went to school with him, basically would say, like, he was not the best singer in his cohort. He was not the best musician. He was not the best music theory person. He was not the best writer. He was at a school with really talented people, all of whom were making songs. But he was really good at finding the people who had talents that he didn't have, and making it a fun environment where they wanted to participate with him. So he made 2 feature-length movies when he was in high school, and the second one called Naughty Bird Curtsy, he wanted to film at the school talent show. And Naughty Bird Curtsy was the name of one band. The evil band was called Das Frühstück, which was a word he saw on a poster at school and thought it looked really menacing until he learned it meant breakfast in German. And he had a fictional narrative, but he built it around the actual talent show that May at Hunter. And he wrote a song. His first song he ever wrote was for one of the bands to perform at the talent show. And so he asked, like the best group of musicians at the school, will you play my song at the talent show for real? And he was really proud of the song. He had a crush on this girl named Amanda. He'd nested what he thought was an extremely clever pun on her name into the lyrics of the song that began, a man does everything wrong, but he sings this song because he loves you. And so his friend in the group brought it to the other musicians, and they're like, why would we play the song by this guy that nobody knows when we have like a good song by Bobby Darin that we were going to perform at the talent show? But they don't tell Lin. They're like, okay, we'll do both songs. They get to the talent show. The administrator says you only get to do one. Lin's there with his video camera to see them perform A Man Does Everything Wrong. They get up on stage and they don't do his song. And Alex Sarlin, the band leader for this group, remembers coming off stage to find Lin in tears holding his video camera saying, what happened? You betrayed me. And Alex says he's felt guilty for 20 years that he didn't want to be the supporting cast of the Lin-Manuel Miranda story. He didn't want to be the person who was enlisted into somebody else's artistic endeavor. He wanted to do the thing that would make him look good in front of his peers. I'd mentioned this to Lin, and Lin felt that he himself was making ridiculous demands on his friend's time, and he himself has felt guilty for 20 years that he even asked Alex to play this song at the talent show. And it was like having, I don't know, a daytime TV moment of bringing them together, and they're like, oh, good, we're fine. And this being Lin, he saved the song, and then when he wrote his first Broadway show in the Heights, and he was trying to figure out a melody for the song 96,000, where everybody's dreaming of what they would do if they won a $96,000 lottery payout. He was thinking, like, what for him is the sound of your dream coming true? It's the sound of being in high school and your friends want to play your song. So he took the melody of A Man Does Everything Wrong, and that's the melody of 96,000 in the show. So it wasn't always a smooth process for him, but you could see him learning in real time how to be a better collaborator. On these movies, like he would make his friends come over to his house every weekend, and at first it was a party, and Abuela Mundi was making them sandwiches, and they'd have sleepover. And 6 months later, they were like, yet again, we got to schlep up to 207th Street. And Aaron Leopold decided to go to summer camp instead of filming the rest of Clayton's Friends, the movie, and arrived at summer camp to an irate letter from Lin-Manuel saying, how dare you forsake our shooting schedule to go off and, make lanyards in the woods. And Aaron thought their friendship was over. And then a week later at summer camp, Aaron got another letter from Lin-Manuel apologizing for the first letter and saying, I'm so sorry. Of course our friendship means more to us than the shooting schedule. This movie is called Clayton's Friends, not Clayton's Coworkers. Have a great time at summer camp. We'll finish shooting when you get back. So you could really see this sort of process of him learning how to figure out how to be a collaborator. And then I had to learn how to collaborate with him. And so sometimes it was like easy fact-checking, like my first kiss was Claire Newman, not Amanda Morales, so switch that around. I wrote Satisfied before I wrote Schuyler Sisters, so that was easy. But back to your lovely conception of the spaces through which he can become himself, his biggest note was, the first draft of this book, the narrator addressed him as Lin, which is what all of his friends call him, except for his parents, who only refer to him as Lin-Manuel. And Lin-Manuel was a very important name for his father. It's a name that comes from a Puerto Rican revolutionary poem from the 1960s of a Vietnam soldier who has a child, first name Lin from Vietnam, last name Manuel, Spanish name, hoping that his son will grow up without the shadow of American imperialism dictating his life. And Luis said, if I ever have a son, I'll name him Lin-Manuel. But then Lin-Manuel starts going to a school predominantly non-Latino, and kids can't pronounce his name, and so he has this code switching. He's Lin at school, Lin-Manuel at home. So like everybody who calls him Lin, I called him Lin. And he read it and he said he felt his dad's voice in his head saying, would I be willing to try a draft where he was called Lin-Manuel in the draft? And then there could be a narrative tension between the name that he has been given and the name that he's addressed, and that the story of an artist would be learning to bring your full self into the room. And I thought about it. I interviewed, one of the people I talked to was Olga Merediz, who was the original Abuela Claudia in The Heights, sang the songs for the Abuela in Encanto. And Lin-Manuel had just written his first song entirely in Spanish for Encanto, a song called Dos Oruguitas. And Olga Merediz was singing it, and she said, wow, he's finally become Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I thought, oh, well, that's the arc of the book. He's Lin-Manuel, he's Lin, and then at the end of the book, he'll be able to become Lin-Manuel. And I thought, good note, I'll take it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's really interesting, because there's a way to read this book, which is just getting some more information about pieces you know and love.
Sure.
There's also a way to read this book where it really does feel of like somebody who learns how to learn a lesson again and again and again. One of the sections I love so much was when he was in collaboration with the fellow songwriters for Moana, while he's like opening Hamilton, it's like, and they're all over the world, and it's just like, but he is constantly, what I really appreciated was the ways in which he understood when he met his collaborators what his new writerly goals were. Like there was a sense that that these collaborators were like, okay, I have to up my game in this way. It's like, okay, I can do this, but I'm also going to learn how to do this. And how he would come back and surprise his collaborators by doing more than they needed him to do. Mm-hmm. And then they would fix what he did wrong, and he was good with that. So there's that kind of sense of, he has a clear sense throughout the book of somebody deepening their practice, not just getting better at what they do, but deepening their practice. And as somebody who has long impressed me as someone who I think I first really became aware of you when you were a scholar writing in non-scholarly contexts. And then I became aware of your scholarship and then your public scholarship in different ways. And so I'm curious, you've talked a lot about how you knew you wanted to do this book and you're doing this book and you're figuring a lot of stuff out. Did you have any particular writerly principles or writerly goals that you were reaching for or holding yourself to as you undertook this? Like any sort of craft things that you said, Lynn's giving me all of this, but I'm holding on to this because this is what I can bring.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I will say that for a figure like Lin-Manuel, who can put so much into a single line, he's really lucky that a Shakespeareanist like Lin-Manuel, who does adaptation and genre merging and of taking the real and making it imagined, he's really lucky to have a Shakespeareanist. So there's certain things there. But I'm curious for you as a craftsperson, somebody who thinks about writing for audiences, thinks about writing in a readerly way, what principles did you hold on to?
What a beautiful way of phrasing that. And I'm thinking of, you, Brian, as a scholar who also does performance and who writes scripts and who does podcasts like that. It's a model for me of how to try to figure out what the different genres are through which we can share our work. And I love that. I mean, having, grown up articulating an argument in a conference paper or an article and presenting evidence to support it, my challenge for myself in this book was to say, can I make this argument about what creativity is through telling a story instead of through stating a thesis and providing supporting evidence? And can I trust that if I marshal the right details and arrange them in an order with narrative suspense, that the reader will be able to derive meaning from these episodes, instead of me having to do sidebar 10 lessons of creativity from Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I think probably the first version of it did not succeed in doing that. I was so excited about everything that I learned. I'm like, I would come home, the end of the day, I'd make dinner for my kids, and they'd sit down and be like, guys, I just learned that Lin-Manuel's freshman roommate at Wesleyan was also loving film and hip hop, and so they put up a poster on their dorm room wall of Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen from Full House, and they wrote Lynn over one and Josh over the other. And my daughter, who was then, I think, 12, turned to me and said, oh, Dad, you should put that in a folder called Nobody Cares. And she was probably right about that detail. The publisher had asked for 100,000 words. I gave him 200,000 words, not thinking I could write a book. Who would have thought I could write too much of a book? And I remember my editor saying to me, Daniel, Lin-Manuel Miranda is not Lyndon Baines Johnson. And I thought, well, that's not fair to Lyndon Baines Johnson, just because he can't write songs. There is part of me that wants to Robert Caro this and volume it out. But it was then really whittling it down. And I would say a place I had to push back, Lynn really wanted to shout out all the people that he cared about and all the institutions that had supported him. It was like, can you please put in the name of my friend's hip hop group from high school? Can you please mention this name? And sometimes I would if it fit with the story, but there were lots of people who unfortunately had to go. And I thought of this as, this was another, for me, a writing lesson from Hamilton. Hamilton did a lot, right? And there's only so much that's in the musical. So there's one song in the second act that begins with Aaron Burr singing, how did Hamilton, the short-tempered protean creator of the Coast Guard, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, wow, he created the Coast Guard. That could be that could be a song, that could be a whole thing, but that's not what the story needs, so we're just gonna get one mention of Coast Guard. So I was like, okay, so I'm gonna have the Coast Guard principle, and I wanna write about him writing songs for Star Wars, and I wanna write about him doing Little Mermaid with Alan Menken, and we're just gonna get Coast Guard, just gonna be a passing reference so that the story could come through. And then the other principle was, how can I make this not seem inevitable? In retrospect, of course it's gonna be a hit. Of course Lin-Manuel is gonna succeed. But an early reader had said, you gotta help readers understand how unlikely this is and how many people did wanna follow this path and fell off of it, not for lack of talent, but because of all of the different factors that go in. And so I really wanted to communicate that and try to have it be locked into the perspective of the people at the time. And then my little sort of game with myself was, can I end each chapter where things seem to be going well and then something goes wrong at the end of each chapter? And I remember my dad reading, I think it was chapter 10, and he texted me Daniel discovers the cliffhanger. And I was like, yep, that's what I'm going for. So I would know what the last line was of each chapter, and I would write to that line to try to get there.
Well, I mean, and I think that's also, I think that's why this feels like there's a lot of integrity for me in the way that this feels like a really specific biography about somebody who makes performance. Because the inevitability question in performance is always questioned about the next performance. There's always a question of, will this work in the next show I do or the next performance I give? You know, the book I'm working on about in a biographical register, it's a nightmare, is about an actor who's always on the verge of success, never quite crosses it. So always means anybody who's always on the verge of success is always also on the verge of failure. So that sort of that precarity of the performance path really comes through. And it really is, I think, testament to that goal to try to keep this sense of momentum. And also the sense that he could have stopped at any number of these achievements and coasted, but part of what makes him an interesting biographical subject is he keeps leveling up his own challenges to himself or his own commitments to those around him. So with a short question, short answer, then we'll open up to questions from the crowd is, so you did write a book. And it's a book that's like people are reading. A kid in Brooklyn read it 4 times. It's actually happening. What are you working on next? What are you working on now? What are you thinking about for your next? Because Lin is always thinking about multiple projects at the same time and also thinking forward to what's next. I can't imagine, knowing you to the limited extent that I do, that you are also not stirring some pots for yourself. What's next?
I mean, my son thinks this whole book is just a lost leader to get on Taylor Swift's radar, so we'll see if... The project that's really exciting me now is a very, it's one thing to take somebody whom a lot of people know, and here's the side of them that you don't know. Another thing that excites both of us is here's somebody who you don't know, who you should know. So for a while, I've been following the work of the wonderful Cherokee playwright and lawyer Mary Catherine Nagel, who has been advocating for restoring tribal sovereignty by taking cases to the Supreme Court and also by writing plays that are performed around the country that reveal the hidden histories of the legal structures that have undermined tribal sovereignty. And I remember asking her, like, why, if you want to change the law, why are you writing plays to do that? And she told me that Sonia Sotomayor had introduced her first play, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg had come to her second, and she is now writing for Neil Gorsuch as her target audience, who came to see one of her amazing works. So I'm always fascinated by artists who want their art not simply to entertain an audience, but to transform the world that their audience lives in. And so I wrote a profile of her for The New Yorker a couple years ago, and we're now adapting it with a production company into a feature film, and trying to think about the ways to spotlight her community, her activism, and her artistry. And if you want the kind of anti-Hamilton version of the history of this region, I recommend Mary Catherine Nagel's play Mannahatta, which is focused on the Lenape people of the island that we now call Manhattan, a play that I know Julie knows well, that is focused on 2 time frames, the Lenape in the 17th century encountering the Dutch West India Company coming in, and then the same cast that plays 17th century characters plays 21st century characters as a Lenape descendant goes to work on Wall Street for Lehman Brothers in 2008, right as the financial system comes down. And it's kind of a history of land fraud and of the ways in which Lenape have been dispossessed, but also have forms of resilience and storytelling traditions and community activism that could be a counterpoint. So Mary Catherine Nagel is where I'm going next.
Well, that's very exciting. So we do have about 10 minutes or so where we could take 2 or 3 questions from the group here. I know that a lot has been opened, and I would definitely encourage folks to plan to buy the book. And I see a question from Stacy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian and Daniel. This is just fantastic, and I'm really excited to read the book. Probably like a lot of us here, I'm an audiobook listener, reader, reading with my ears. And I was wondering if you could talk about the audiobook and how that came about and the complexities of representing musical theater, writer, performer, lyricist, musician in an audiobook.
Oh, well, thank you,
And the
Stacey.
producer, too.
Yeah, right. So I thought I have trouble listening to nonfiction audiobooks sometimes if they're just like reading the words in a monotone voice. And I thought this is a book about a dynamic songwriter. The audiobook has to have some dynamism too. And I don't know if some of you know the actor Javier Munoz, who was Lin-Manuel's alternate as Hamilton and as Usnavi before him. And he's a character in the book, and I adore him. I first met him at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival when he was playing the Baker in Into the Woods, 2014. He was going to stay, but he said there was something opening in New York in 2015 in which he was going to be involved. And this is the downside of Hamilton that people don't talk about, robbed Oregon of Javier Munoz. But as I was writing the book, I thought there's only one person who can read Lin-Manuel's story, which is the person who played his voice. So I sent Javi a fan note and said, I love your artistry and your humanity, and I know that you could do this better than anybody. And he wrote back and said, yes. So Javier Munoz narrates the audiobook, and we were so lucky to have a producer for the audiobook who is a graduate of Princeton University, a star musical theater lyricist from the Triangle Club, is that the right name? Named Allison Light, who now is a professional producer, and she saw what an audiobook could be. And so we got permission from Lin-Manuel for Javier Munoz not just to read my words on the page, but to rap and to sing and to convey some of the texture of what it means for art to come into being. And God, maybe some of you have had this experience if you write for other people to read. I look at these words on the page and then I hear Javier, and it's like, I feel like Dorothy going from black and white Kansas into Technicolor Oz. There were complicated legal questions because Lin was very kind to give permission for us to quote the lyrics. Singing lyrics is a different legal category. And then the question was, is rapping more like singing or more like talking? And that's an interesting musicological as well as legal category. But we did get permission for a lot to be in there. So I am thrilled that the audiobook exists in that form, and I would encourage you. Maybe you want to experience it in multiple formats. You want to have a hard copy so you can check the references, see the endnotes, see how the sausage gets made, and then when you're in the car, you're on the walk. That's what I like to do, is listen to Javi.
Naomi?
You could wait for the microphone so it's easier for everyone to hear. Thank you.
Why, thank you. I have kind of a two-parter, but it's two short parts. One is, what was the most surprising thing that you learned in this endeavor? And the second is, I feel that every time one engages in a work of artistic creation, it changes you a little bit. I'd like to know how this process has changed you.
Thank you for that question. So I hadn't known that Lin-Manuel's mother was really his most foundational teacher. And in fact, she was the person whom he asked me to begin the project with. And Brian alluded to this, that Lin-Manuel has a father who's this amazing sort of nonstop go-getter, left Puerto Rico at 19 to go to NYU, didn't speak English, and worked his way into the Koch administration, helped Hillary Clinton get elected, a nonstop guy, and had a son who was extremely sensitive and empathetic. And little Lin-Manuel would cry when he saw the news on TV. He'd cry at an unhoused person on the street. He would cry at the chord changes to Bridge Over Troubled Water.
He turned off Mary Poppins because of Feed the Birds.
Yes, exactly. And Luis wanted to toughen him up so that he wouldn't get bullied. And he read early at school, and other kids would throw sand in his mouth, and he'd cry when he saw the school letterhead. So Luis got a boxing puppet to teach his son how to fight, and Lin just had to hug the puppet. Said, no fighting. But his mom, Luz, is a child psychologist. And she told me that she saw her job as letting her son know that whatever he was feeling was okay to feel. And he would come home overwhelmed at this magnet school, Hunter, because he's surrounded by kids who can do math in an instant, and math gives him headaches and stomach aches. And she would rub his back and give him breathing exercises and sing him lullabies. And she had a mantra for him when he was feeling overwhelmed. And she would say, it's good that you can access all these feelings. You want to be a writer. She would say to him, it's all grist for the mill. And that phrase became his sort of guiding principle as an artist. And he says sometimes it was weaponized against him. He'd be like, you don't want to take out the garbage? Hey, you want to be an artist? It's all grist for the mill. You have to know how this this works. But his first job was at McDonald's, and he got stressed out having to calculate the tab for the customers in the right amount of time. Had a nightmare that the pencil had been impaled in his skull. And he told his mom about it, and she said, it's okay, honey. You're feeling anxious. That's okay to feel. And you want to be a writer. All grist for the mill. And lo and behold, after In the Heights became a Broadway hit and he won the Tony, Stephen Schwartz, composer of Wicked and Pippin, and an anthology show called Working about people's jobs, asked this hot new songwriter, would you write a song about a first job? And Lin said, have I got a song for you? And he wrote a song about working at McDonald's and the drudgery of every day having to add up the tally, the one joy being when he went out for delivery, and that was the name of the song, Delivery. And his mom told me, she heard the song and she turned to him and said, ha, it's all grist for the mill. So that was a surprise to me to learn. And I also, and the thing that connected to what I feel like I learned from the writing of the book is, I like Lin's wife, Vanessa, whom Brian mentioned, who is this super rational lawyer and scientist, amazingly self-possessed person who loves her husband and has zero interest in the world of musical theater. And he would come home and say, I just met Jay-Z. And she would say, and I care why? And she would tell me she couldn't work in the same room as Lin-Manuel because he writes as an actor. And so if it's a funny song, he is laughing out loud. And if it's Eliza's epilogue to Hamilton, he is going through a whole box of Kleenex as he is sobbing out loud. And I'm hearing this and I'm thinking, oh God, that's why I didn't hang out with theater kids in high school. It's like, it's too much. But it's an amazing thing not to have those layers of inhibition. Not, Chiara says, he's somebody who walks in the world without armor. And I was very surprised that as I wrote this book, I would get to like a punchline and I would laugh out loud. And then I got to the death of Lin-Manuel's grandfather and I was crying at my computer. And I'd never experienced that before. And I thought, why have I been so cynical and guarded about this process? What an amazing way to be able to experience the life of your characters. So I feel grateful that I've been opened up a little bit through the process of writing the book.
And that is a gift. That comes through on the page. The grandfather's death in particular, deeply moving. So one last question, perhaps. I see one in the back.
Yeah, coming.
Thank you. This has been so interesting. So Hamilton is about liberty and independence and freedom and the founding of our nation and really the Constitution. I mean, so many interesting things that I think are particularly relevant today. I'm wondering, in the process of writing the book, did you get to hear from him about like what messages the musical like has on today's like kind of political climate? And does he feel like listeners and fans of the musical are taking away any lessons that, you know, are relevant given our current political climate?
What a timely question. Yes, I had just gone back with him about this. I did an op-ed for the Times about like what Hamilton means 10 years later, and there's been a lot of discourse of like, is it just Obama-era cringe? Have we, grown out of the optimism that we thought we had back then? And what he thought he was doing doesn't have to be what you would take away from the show, but he didn't feel that he was writing an optimistic Up With America show. He thought he was writing a tragedy, and he looked really closely at Shakespearean tragic models for how to craft a drama in which the final turn would be both surprising and inevitable. And he saw it as the clash between two different temperaments, two different ways of moving through the world. One being Hamilton's, who is charging forward at every moment and is always confident that he can use his language to transform the world. The other being Aaron Burr, who is always hesitant, always holding back, comes from privilege and is afraid that if he risks it, he will lose it. Sings "Wait for It," right, as opposed to "My Shot." And that at the end of the show, the one moment when Burr charges forward and Hamilton holds back is the moment of their demise. And he thought that would be a sort of question ultimately of legacy, of what you leave behind. And one thing that really interested me, I felt, this was a sort of also when you were talking about principles that we had to hold to, I thought like it's really important to include failures in this book. And that was tricky for Lin-Manuel. It was like, this is not to expose you, it's not to get you, it's because for this to be a genuinely inspiring story, people have to know that the artists they admire don't get it right every time and have to work through different things. And there's a micro failure and then there was a bigger failure. I thought the micro one was Stephen Sondheim came to see heard the recording of an early version before the show opened, and he wrote to Lin-Manuel and said, "Who lives, who dies, who tells your story is not the moral of your show. That is an anticlimactic and inadequate summary of what you've given before." And I thought, wow, what do you do when your writing hero tells you you got it wrong at the end of your show? And he said what he does in that situation is he sits with that criticism and he thinks either Sondheim's right or he's right, but he hasn't earned it yet. And sometimes he cut things because people didn't like them. In that case, he really wanted to hang on to that question, but he thought he needed to earn it. And he decided to write this earlier song for George Washington to set up that motif. And he told Alex Lacamoire to like orchestrate the hell out of it. So when we hear Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story, it's set up in the context of not just what a character's legacy is going to be, but what America's legacy is going to be. And the other sort of moment of failure that went into it, this also was a surprise to me. I hadn't known about like all these other shows that Lin-Manuel wrote before In the Heights, and Hamilton was his 8th musical that he had written, including high school and college stuff. And the reason you haven't heard about these other shows is because Lin doesn't want you to hear about them because they didn't turn out too well. So his college thesis show, I'll just describe this briefly. He felt bad about his breakup with his high school girlfriend. He thought, what if he was older and had gone and like could have handled the breakup better? And then he was like, what if there were a sci-fi time travel thing and my older self could come back to my younger self and have a better breakup and also have an affair with my high school girlfriend at the same time? And he wrote this for his senior thesis project. He called it Last Tango in Paris Meets Back to the Future. And it was a disaster. And like he knew it was a disaster at the moment when the actor playing the older version of the boyfriend was supposed to like take off his cap and reveal he was also the younger version. He had this aging makeup in his hair, and the actor took off his cap and sat down, and all the white aging makeup went poof up in the air. And what he thought was going to be the gasp moment, instead everybody laughed. And he told me that night after that show, he broke down in tears in his car, and he said he felt like he had all the school's resources and he wasted them, and all these other students were doing amazing things. And he said, I was Aaron Burr watching Alexander Hamilton surpass me at every moment. And I thought, oh, well, that's the heart of it for him, right? It's about how you choose to live your life and how you choose to use your time. And I think that's what he's really sticking with in the show.
Well, as we use our time, I'd like to hand it back over thanks so much for being here tonight, and I'll turn it back over to our host to close us out and to give instructions for next steps.
What an amazing conversation. Thank you both so much. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
That's a lovely question.